Okay. Hi everyone. How lovely to be here with you, even if it's just mediated by the screens. So I'm Dr. Pat Noxolo. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham. And I'm here at the Royal Geographical Society in their large Ondarchi Theatre, where we're going to talk tonight about Sonia E. Barrett's beautiful installation, which she made at in the map library of the Royal Geographical Society, called Dreading the Map. And we're also going to talk about her new installation, which I hope you can see a fragment of it behind me, which she has made for the Ondarchi Theatre today. So I want to just, before we do all that, just welcome everyone who is able to join us tonight. And we've got different audiences in different places. So I want first to welcome our panelists, Sonia Barrett, our artist, Tia-Monique Uzor, who is the postdoctoral fellow for CARICUK, Léa Bematol, who is part of our map lective, and explain about what I mean by that in a bit, and Dr. Catherine Souch, who is from the Royal Geographical Society. So those are the ones who are in the room with social distancing. We've got a lot of empty chairs in front of us, but I know that there's a lot of people listening to us. So we also, on Zoom, have a curated audience, which is an audience that we brought together because then we know that they share some of our interests and support our project. So these include Kesawa John, Anya Animado, Becky Kitchen, Deb Thomas, Susan Maines, Karen Wilkes, Mimi Scheller, Rita Gale, Agostino Pinnock, Connie Bell, Cynthia Anyadi, Suzanne Scaife, Jessica Taylor, and Peter Craftle. And then beyond that, we have our YouTube audience, where we welcome you very much to live stream with us, and it's great to know that you're there, but also we welcome the people who will be watching this on the recording, and I particularly want to do a shout out to our map lective, the people who are sitting at home plaiting maps together in the little packets that Sonia has sent to them. I'm particularly excited to know that people are doing that with us tonight. So the first thing that we've got lots of things that we're going to do, and each of our panelists is going to spend a few minutes talking to you. But the first thing that we want to do is to show you our film, which we're very excited about. CARICUK has commissioned a film about Sonia's sculpture, which she did in the map room, Dreading the Map. It's a film by Gennaro Ambrosino, and we'd like to show you that now. I want to think creatively about insecurity in the world, about race as one of those insecurities. And I want to think about the Caribbean and the UK.
How could you begin to visually show that these places are bound together and implicated?
Sonia's work raises a number of really important geographical issues. How do we understand the map, and what's its job in the current times?
I think this is also at the heart of the colonial ease that it's possible to have in a place like London, because what's happening is happening over there. And the map shores this idea up, that these are somehow separate spaces.
This is a story that I think is really important for us to tell, for us to acknowledge, to interrogate.
It's a provocation. It encourages us to think about what those maps are, what they represent, who created them, why they were created, how they've been used.
Dreading the Map was the most radical because it really involved pulping the map and creating these long strands. So it smashed these places together into dreadlocks. The project really started when I had finished the last part of my research, which was researching into the plantations in the southern states, which was really traumatic. I was relieved to leave and return to London. And then it struck me that actually, why am I so relieved to be leaving this one geography and going to another when actually probably London is more implicated?
The Caribbean and the UK have had a very, very long history together. The Caribbean and people in the Caribbean are often still very aware of that history because it shaped their landscapes, it shaped their societies.
whereas the UK is often wanting to forget about that history. It seems to them a long time ago. And my argument as a geographer is that actually that relationship between the Caribbean and the UK has actually shaped the UK as much as it shaped the Caribbean. So I want to think creatively about insecurity in the world, about race as one of those insecurities. Sonia's work raises a number of really important geographical issues, which are around place and the making of place, around connection and how we interrelate with each other, and around mapping. How do we understand the map and what's its job in the current times? So Sonia's work cuts right to the centre of what we want the project to do.
When I was thinking about what was making me feel that that was over there and that was over here, I was feeling this is a problem of mapping. And I think this is also at the heart of the colonial ease that it's possible to have in a place like London, because what's happening is happening over there. And the map shores this idea up, that these are somehow separate spaces. And when I thought about bringing them together and scrambling them so that they could not be used to claim territory and they could not be used to create a here and a there, I thought, well, there's a practice that is already in the black community that does that. And that is plaiting and braiding and dreadlocking. It's actually to take agency using a black practice that everyone in black community is aware of.
For me, felt like something very controversial, but also a very dedicated way of sharing an idea. You know, this idea of a community of black women getting together, this idea of plaiting, which in any black culture is very important, because this is a way of expressing ourselves, and it's part of our culture.
I thought it would be really exciting to make this work here in the map room in the Royal Geographical Society in London, where so many map makers have departed from and critically returned to recount their versions of what they saw.
This space is a really interesting space. It's deliberately set up, I think, to showcase the Society's involvement with fieldwork and exploration, both over the 19th and the 20th centuries, so over the long history of the Society since it was founded in 1830. And I think it's one of the most obviously colonial spaces in the building. I mean, a lot of what's on the walls in the building is set up to showcase that history, and of course, given the history of geography and imperialism and colonialism and how deeply those are intertwined, it kind of demonstrates that history very compellingly. So it's a deeply colonial space, but it's also a space that's at the heart of the organisation, the heart of the organisation's history. And this is a story that I think it's really important for us to tell, for us to acknowledge, to interrogate, and to also do work in terms of so how do we reckon with these difficult and these complicated histories? And I think more importantly, how do we address the impacts that these histories continue to have on us today, whether that's across society, whether it's on geography as a discipline.
And as we move together towards a future where, as small islands, we're all going to have to face climate change and all sorts of shared insecurities, we really need to remember that history and draw on it together.
It's a provocation. It encourages us to think about what those maps are, what they represent, who created them, why they were created, how they've been used. And I think it's really important for geography education, for geographers to be questioning in this particular way. So it's on one level, it's a beautiful installation, it's a beautiful sculpture, but it's just so much more than that as well.
As important as the sculpture is the way the sculpture facilitated us to gather in the space. It made a place for us. And the conversations that happened here while we were braiding are as important as the sculpture, which is merely an output. So the sculpture is not a thing to celebrate anything or any one individual, but rather it's to create a collective, which is a sculptural practice which is the exact opposite of the kind of traditional sculptures that celebrate one individual that we see so often in Europe.
the fact that it's come into this space at the Royal Geographical Society and it's made such a provocative impact. It's saying a lot of powerful things. And it's something that if you get a chance to experience it, it really seeps into your body as you experience it, both from just looking at it, but also when you experience it close up, you're able to see the different intricacies in that. And that for me really reflects not just dance, which is also a performance, something that you experience in the moment, but also a lot of African diasporic and African rituals, which are meant to be experienced in the moment at the time. And so what we're really left with this sculpture is as it leaves this space is what we have experienced in our bodies and what we have experienced as we interact with it up close.
The other thing that I want to do with this project is to make the issue of race in education more easily spoken about and more openly and explicitly talked about and addressed. I think there's quite a lot of anxiety around race, and at the moment, because of the happenings in the US around Black Lives Matter, we know that there are things to be addressed, but for the UK, there's such a long history, such a long imperial history. People find it quite hard to talk about race, particularly in contexts that have been very heavily affected by colonialism, such as geography. So I want us to begin to be able to talk, not comfortably. I think it will always be a challenge and it shouldn't be comfortable. It's a history of violence. But I want us to be able to talk openly and to be able to really envision change, actually thinking, how might the discipline change? And yes, if the project can just do a little bit to begin that conversation, to start to think about how might concretely we change, then I'll be very happy with that.
I hope you enjoyed the film. You can watch it again on our YouTube channel, the CARICUK YouTube channel. I now want to move to have a chat with Sonia Barrett. I'm very excited to chat with Sonia. We've been working together off and on and having conversations together for the last sort of 3 or 4 years now, since my previous project, CARICUK, where Sonia was the commissioned artist on that project and created not one sculpture, but several sculptures for us at that time. We've carried on having conversations about how we might work together again, because we always have conversations that I find incredibly kind of fertile, generative, start me thinking about all kinds of different things that are really quite deeply geographical. So I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Sonia, is to tell us a little bit about your wider corpus of work. What is it that motivates you and drives you? What is it that you produce?
My work is driven by concerns of slavery, modern day slavery, the history of slavery. Is driven by I'm trying to understand Black communities in different geographies, in particular here in the UK, in Europe, in America and in the Caribbean. My research is always moving between those different spaces. Those are the things that really drive me, and the weight of our histories, and what can we do about that, and how those are still lived, like how we still live those histories.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that really kind of attracted me about your work was how you use very ordinary things, really. Very ordinary things in our lives, things that we take for granted. I remember you giving a talk about chairs, because you used to use chairs a lot, and how we just sit down. We don't even look at what it is that we're sitting down on. And that's how we treat some people in the world as well. These are people that we don't pay attention to. We just rest on them,
yes,
and let them support us.
Yeah, I did. I've done a lot of work with furniture, a very large body of work where I was just using furniture as a way to try and understand and unpack
how is it that we are complicit with having people support us that we don't see, we don't look at, but are very much there, and we don't acknowledge, but it's a very real support. And, you know, really started with furniture, especially chairs and tables, in order to think about those things, but also how to move from a space of being sat upon to a space of agency. Yes. And collectivization is one of the things that kept coming out as being a powerful way to move to a space of agency as an objectified person. Yeah.
Yes, that sort of relationship between the object and the human is really speaks to quite a lot of issues within geography about the kind of more than human, or how do we relate to our environment and understand things that are not human as valuable. And I find all of that really fascinating. And for you then to move, when you first started to talk to me about this idea that you had about maps, that sort of treasured object that we have within geography, I was really interested to see what you would do with that object. So tell me a little bit about the installation that you did in the map room of the Royal Geographical Society. What was it that you wanted to do, and what was it that you created?
So I see that, so what's happened is that I was working a lot with furniture, and what's happened is it's somehow lifted and risen, the work. And what happened in the map room is a continuation of what happened in an installation I did at Villa Romana in Florence, which was a response to a kind of a tropical hardwood floor. So also the floor in that map room is quite prominent. And for me, working with the furniture, it created an alliance between black and brown bodies, tropical hardwoods, and they have this history of being shipped, so and this expensive type of furniture. And then when I got to a space with an expensive floor, all the bodies were already in the floor. Right. So what happened is the work started to lift, and I started working with hair, and the maps is the thing that I wanted to work with, especially after the end of my last research. And I realized that these things are all connected. What happened in the map room was the first time that I was able to assemble a collective, which was through the funding, was possible through the funding. And that was just amazing, because it's how I've always wanted to work, but never really been able to. So map making for me is already explicitly a collective work. So in this room here, we have many individual names that are up in the ceiling, and in the map room there are many male individuals celebrated, but map making is collective for them too. So many of those map makers were delirious and literally carried through spaces that they were mapping, or they were. It was not possible for them to map without people who were on the ground. So it's always been collective. I feel that remaking the map now, I want it to be explicitly collective. So in assembling a collective to braid together and make these maps, that's part of being explicitly collective. So grounding and starting a map collective to do this work. That's the first point. The second point is that it was really another way to deal with archive. So shredding is very, very powerful for me, because it's not ripping, it's not tearing, it's not burning. It's a way. It's also a practice that happens in Europe that you do with things to protect your identity. So with the documents that we shred, or that shredded in offices, are documents that could be used against you. So to shred the map becomes this acknowledge that this map was used against us, or people from many generations ago, and even today. And we shredded maps from the independence of Nigeria, for example, that were sponsored by Shell. We shredded maps that were old maps from Britain, from the Caribbean, so from every part of triangular trade. So there's a wholesale kind of mashing together of everything, which is how I think is a really helpful way to understand what has happened. So those are the two things that really drove. And because of the weight of the map, it was didn't make sense for me to try and tackle something like this on my own. Only with the collective of women were we able to deal with this massive thing, because everyone can unpack from a different space. Everyone was braiding in a different way. And that seemed appropriate. So not at all a singular piece, and absolutely about the collective.
Yeah, I love that sense of the thing, kind of the shredding, kind of echoing back through history, and the disappearance of certain maps, you know, the hiding of certain maps, and as well as the presenting. With the map room, we always think about the presenting of maps, but there's also maps that are kind of shameful, that are hidden, and I love all that. I think that's really interesting. I wanted to ask you, just as a sort of sub-question about hair, because there's a lot of kind of black women's hair techniques being used in these sculptures. And we were talking earlier about this sculpture which uses extensions, and then the ones in the map room that was about plaiting, and then you know. So tell us a little bit about why is it important to have black women's hair techniques in a space like this, I guess.
Well, I thought it was. Sometimes there are some problems, like I see the map as a kind of particular type of problem. And sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are already in our culture ways of dealing with things that I want to draw on. So I see myself as the artist just facilitating black practices that are already, I'm not inventing a new practice, this is a black practice already. So if we're having a problem, we could use a tool we have for somewhere else to deal with this. So it made sense for me to bring that, and also because I knew it would enable me to call together people who have an understanding of black culture, who are participating in black culture, who understand how to braid in this way. So altogether, the sculpture made the space, enabled me to collectivize, us to collectivize in this space. It was a very inclusive space, so we had lots of other people came in and dropped in, and it was wonderful in the building. Everyone was coming down and helping and braiding, but it was essentially a way of taking ownership of this space, and then it became our space, and then other people could come in because we are generous like that. So I felt that was like the right thing to do. I see a map as almost a warmongering space, and I feel that black hair is about caremongering. So to braid someone else's hair is an act of love. So what do you do with something that's so destructive and so something so damaging? And to shred it, which is a way of dealing with things that are interfering in your business or protecting yourself, and then to plait it, it seems to me like two steps that make sense.
Yes.
As a way of dealing with the map.
Yes. I think there's always something in your work, for me, that's a kind of terrible beauty, you know, that kind of Yeats idea that, you know, something, it becomes something very beautiful, and it kind of floated across the map room space in this incredibly kind of, it reminded me of clouds. I'm very interested in fractals, and it reminded me of all of that kind of thing. It was beautiful. But at the same time, there's a terrible beauty to that because of that history of maps and the ways in which maps have often defined black people out of spaces. So that there was all of that kind of going on, whilst at the same time, when we were actually doing the plaiting in a largely empty Royal Geographical Society building, which was fascinating in itself, there was so much laughter, so much music, so much, you know, kind of joy that accompanies plaiting as well. So we kind of created a space that was a very definite kind of culture. Sort of these hair techniques bring a culture with them. And I thought that was really interesting to sort of think about.
Absolutely, because this building is resonant with a history but we also have a history. Our history is not in a building, but it's in. I mean, our history is obviously in some buildings. It is in this building too, but our culture is partly doing, and this tradition of doing this has happened. This act has happened in Jamaica. It's happened on the continent of Africa. It's happening here in Britain today. It's happening in the southern states. You know, so this action brings with it other memories, and in order to deal with some of the other traumas, we can bring something that's like kind of healing and meditative for us over all that time as well. Yeah. And it's very interesting that for me, I think that, you know, many shaving saves heads were often shaved to come here as a way of removing people from their identity. So I think that begins to when you know that, it begins to give you an understanding of how much identity and how healing it is to create and determine your style, your hairstyle.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that there's something so strange about. I mean, I know people are watching us from home, but we're kind of in a empty theatre, and you can perhaps hear the echo of that. There's something kind of quite emotional about a space like this, about the reasons why it's empty, the kind of loss that we've had this year, and the way that we are gathered in this space. And I wanted, I suppose, on that to kind of move to this piece, which I know the piece that we've got here in the Ondaatje Theatre is a piece that Sonia was saying earlier on, carries a lot of emotion. And I thought perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, about the kind of what you wanted to create through this piece.
So this is a response also to this particular theatre space, which is where people would explain where they had been and define and explain what they'd seen in a very particular way. But obviously all the people that had been seen and captured were, you know, whether photographically or through anecdotal evidence, are not here to speak. So in this space of speaking, I wanted to have this a kind of grief, the kind of weight of how much has been lost, or how much, how sad all those processes were, but also, so it's a kind of emotional outpouring. But I was also thinking in terms of clouds, because one thing that maps do is they create a space of fixity, and it's the first step for possession. You know, the continent of Africa was carved up on a table, on a map. And so all this grief is all related, but water travels through landscape. It doesn't respect borders in that way. And so to have these kind of clouds is is out of maps. To have maps reign themselves is to work beyond, to explode the idea of the map entirely, which is what needs to do, all the problems that we're facing need this kind of this kind of rethinking of the map, because all those ideas are about this idea of here and there, which don't make any sense for all the things we're facing today. I feel that these maps, these clouds are, it's just emotional, an emotional space. And the other work was very beautiful, and maybe I didn't have enough grief, so I wanted a little more grief in there, because of the severity of what has happened.
Yeah, of what we're facing. And I do think that there's that kind of sense of, the wake and of the rain, and also, I kind of feel like I can see sort of jellyfishes and lots of natural formations in this work and in the previous work, that sort of sense that there's lots of living things in there, but also that sense that the living stuff trails behind us, right? That which is gone or absent or was present and is no longer with us. There's lots of really beautiful things about this. And I guess, for me, all the more poignant for the fact that we're in this space and other people won't necessarily be able to appreciate it in the space. We can see it electronically, but there's always that kind of absence and presence, the sort of gain and loss that we get in this beautiful artwork, which I really appreciate. Thank you ever so much, Sonia. That was really, as usual, very exciting, articulate. I've got lots of kind of interesting things about fixity and possession that I want to sort of carry on mulling over. What I'd like to do now is introduce Tia-Monique Uzor. Tia-Monique is, as I say, the postdoctoral fellow for CARICUK, and she now is going to give her response to the artworks that Sonia has been producing.
Thank you, Pat. So good evening, everyone. As Pat has said, my name is Tia-Monique Uzor, and I just want to say how excited I am to be here, sharing this platform with so many wonderful people who are thinking through ideas around race and insecurity through their own practices. I am a dance scholar and practitioner who's interested in themes around identity, popular culture, womanism, and resistance within African and African diasporic dance forms. What I really attempt to do within my research is engage with Africanist dance as a vehicle for creating and interrogating African and African diasporic worlds, and I try to do this through interdisciplinary and embodied research. So in the past, this has looked at me doing fieldwork on the evolving coming-of-age ceremony, the Iwa Akwa in southeastern Nigeria, and it's also looked at co-theorizing with African and African diasporic dance artists who are creating and navigating the hostile, subsidized British dance industry. In my PhD, I looked at how British Caribbean diasporic artists use choreography as a tool to express and embody and navigate their complex transnational identities. So whilst I haven't been directly engaging with ideas of security and insecurity, the questions that insecurity brings up are inherently within my work and my questioning too. So recently, I've been thinking about Camus E. Brathwaite's concept of dialectics to interrogate how dance repertory historically moved across transnational networks of the Black Atlantic and beyond. And I've been doing this using methods from the digital humanities. I mainly have been thinking about this in another postdoc position that I hold at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama on a project called Dunham's Data, Catherine Dunham and Digital Methods for Dance Historical Inquiry. CARICUK and that project are very different, but through Sonia's Dreading the Map, I'm beginning to find real harmony between the two. The moment this struck me was when I first entered the map room and saw the sculpture delicately suspended in the air, its tendrils spiraling out and back on each other. There seemed to be no beginning or end. Although I had been a co-producer, plaiting maps together in fellowships with other Black women on the map lectured, I hadn't yet encountered the sculpture in its entirety in the space. Its impact on me was visceral. What I had been struggling to articulate for weeks was found in the spirals and the strands and the curls of the braided, shredded map. So Brathwaite's concept, dialectics, depicts the spatial imaginary of the Caribbean and the back and forth, to and fro movement of the ocean, reflecting the fluid relations between land and sea that are encompassed in Caribbean identities and cultures. Brathwaite offers dialectics to us through the image of a woman sweeping her yard. In her movement, he finds that she's not merely shifting sand from one area to another, but that she's actually treading on water, echoing the rhythms of the ocean through the historical passage that saw her come to be on the island, and the possibility of the future. Although there's a sense of ritual and routine within this Jamaican woman sweeping, Brathwaite clearly emphasizes her actions as a continuous journey, one in which she arrived or was born into. As a child of diaspora, she inhabits the liminal space of transition that cannot be fully encapsulated through notions of national belonging. Instead, belonging is found in ancestral cultures and practices and their iterations across the globe. In her dialectic flow, she moves across continents and along continuums to arrive at the shores of the Caribbean. So in my writing, I'm really trying to expand this dialectic notion from the Caribbean to reach the shores of the rest of the African diaspora, that is the Americas, Europe, and to West and Central Africa. I'm moving away from dialectic's typical application as a model for cyclical circulation across the diaspora, and instead aligning with scholars who recognize the impacts that differently shaped shorelines and tidal waves have on any movement and therefore cannot be reduced to one pathway. I understand dialectics as a cumulative backwards and forwards motion with no logic that speeds up and slows down. It is a motion that is affected by what it collects along the way, the environments that it encounters, the gravitational pull of the moon, which we might understand to be as history, culture, and power. Dialectic motion carries within it identities and cultural aesthetics, language, sound, music, dances, beliefs, and other practices. As they journey, they are transformed, and so are different on each return. Dialectic motion refuses to be predicted. Its pathways are neither horizontal, vertical, nor circular. It moves between them all in a constant multi-directional shifting. At the shore, we cannot tell if this motion is arriving or leaving, nor determine its final resting place. We initially perceive it as random, shifting our perspectives of what continuity is and what origins are. Dialectic motion is not, however, random. It is a fluid and dynamic, chaotic system, chaos as in chaos theory. That is determined by initial conditions, how it came to be, how it came to move, etc. Using Stuart Hall's articulations on identity, we can understand these motions as both a matter of being and becoming. They belong both to the future and past. And so I hope from my explanation of how I'm using dialectics and seeing Sonia's sculpture that you were struck in the same way that I was in how the two reflect one another. In particular, for me, the embodied technique of shredding maps of Europe, Caribbean, and Africa, and bringing them together through the ancestral embodied practice of braiding was deeply anti-colonial. As we did this as a group of Black women under the gaze of Captain Cook and his peers in the map room, there was this sense of talking back that many of us experience as taboo in the African and African diasporic communities. And this is what Bell Hooks articulates as defiantly, daringly speaking to a person in authority as if they were an equal. The talking back in this space occurred in this dialectic liminal realm across the continuum of time and space as we shredded the maps and we questioned what we understood to be the sacredness of maps, and we questioned what and our understanding of nation and the African diaspora. Today, we reconfigured and rejoined and made connection even if some of them were tentative. The established narrative of the past encompassed in these gigantic portraits beamed down on Black women laughing through the eyes of white men. And so the present laughed in the face of the presence of the past, undoing what had been done and reiterating what has always been known, that in our diversity, there's also an inherent unity despite enforced separation. This is not the idea of return, but is a reconciliation that allows each stand to be an individual and unique, but also recognizes the strength and similarities of the collective. I see Sonia's technique as an embodied ritual that does what Hooks articulates as moving us from object to subject. This type of liberatory ritual heals and makes new life and new growth possible. The performance of this embodied ritual has a dual nature that decenters the white gaze, rendering the portraits to outsiders a shadow of what was. Spectators who can observe but cannot fully understand what is occurring through this embodied ancestral practice. There is a dual aspect or double consciousness within Sonia's practice that excludes those outside of the culture. This is very typical within African diasporic cultural expressions, as they were often feared and therefore banned by colonial leaders. The ancestral practice of braiding Afro hair is shrouded in mystery to those who are outside of the cultures that engage with it. There is a public beauty, intricacy, and mystery as hairstyles appear and disappear. It can be mistaken as a part of any other beauty regime. In private, these techniques are necessary and sacred, used for protection, nurture, encouraging growth. Precious and sometimes tumultuous times spent with mothers, aunties, cousins, and older siblings, engaging in conversation whilst oiling scalps. It is a ritual inherent in the Black experience. In thinking about Sonia's sculpture as embodied ritual that speaks back, I don't mean the same kind of speaking back in the way that Hooks is engaging with it. I'm understanding it as a ritual of reorientation to each other, a speaking to each other in a language that we understand, a centering of our own knowledges and ways of being that shreds to pieces colonial narratives of ourselves. Through the dialectic model that traverses space and time, this embodied ritual is a continuity of some of the other practices that our ancestors used, such as voodoo, obia, knowledge of the land, bush, and herbs. And these were used to overcome, unite, survive, sustain life, and empower. And I believe Sonia's sculpture does the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia-Monique. That was great. So deep, lots to think about. So I want to move on to Léa Bematol.
Hi.
Who joined us as part of the MAP Lective and has very graciously agreed to come along and speak with us today. So Léa, do you want to just tell us something about your background and who you are and what you do now?
So my name is Léa. First of all, good evening, everyone. Mm-hmm. I've been honored and privileged to be invited by Sonia to take part in the work. So I met Sonia a few years ago. We did a yoga retreat together, actually, and I was there as a massage therapist, and we kind of stay in touch, and so she invited me to take part in the work. So I've been working as a massage therapist for about 10 years now. And I work with a person-centered approach where my work is about, it's an invitation to reconnect with oneself, reuniting the body and the mind. And from there, you know, there is an array of possibility as long as the person is willing to take on the journey. Mm-hmm. So my work is very, I've got a degree, so there is the sort of academic knowledge, but there's also a lot of intuition. So I work with, you know, what the body is telling me. Obviously, I'm working with the person and what they're telling me, but I'm also working with what the body is communicating with me.
Okay, so a really interesting perspective to think about the body and what it can do, how it relates to community. So I wondered whether you could tell us how the experience of being involved with the sculpture, what it kind of said to you and what you understood from it.
First of all, I was really excited of being invited to do some bread because we all kind of, you know, all of us seated at this table know what this is about, you know. Once a week or every so often, our mums or ourselves are doing our hair, so it's kind of a normal thing. And so I was very excited about that. And to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect. So I went there, you know, with an open mind. And so the first day, when I arrived, it was very, very free, you know. So I basically said, you know, you just plait and that's it. You know, there's no, there were no instruction just to do plaiting, you know. And also some nuances, you know, about the different texture of the map. So she, you know, so that was interesting to almost have like a comparison with the different texture of hair that you can have. So my experience was that the first day was very nice because the sun was shining. So I went straight for the window and enjoy, you know, the vibe, if I can say. And but it was also very interesting to be surrounded by all those portraits of guys, and to meet as well, you know, some lovely women. So that was the first day. So, you know, left quite uplifted, and also very interesting to see Sonia works. I never saw her working before, so it was a new interesting process. You know, we were plaiting. She would collect and then she would create. So I found that really, yeah, it's almost like she invited me, I'm talking about my experience, but it's almost like she invited me to take part into something which is very intimate. So that was nice. And then on the second day, it was a total different experience. A new group of women came. Some from the previous day were there, but other women joined, you joined, and then the oppression and the heaviness of the building kind of struck me in a way. I felt feeling cold all day. The vibe was still really lovely, but the day was grey, and all of a sudden I realized, you know, the institution I was in, you know. And so the 2 days were really contrasting, but very, yeah, rich to take on.
Yes, yeah. I really like the way that you're thinking about the building, because there certainly is that that sense that this is a really interesting building, quite a lot of history. Yes. There's kind of warmth in here, there definitely is, but there's also a heavy institution. I like the way you put that kind of weight of the building, particularly for us as Black women, and the kind of contingent way in which we're allowed here, maybe not allowed here, sometimes allowed, you know, that's all really, really interesting. I guess I'm kind of interested in how you relate that embodied work of plaiting with the sort of embodied work that you normally do as a masseuse. Are there any relationships between those two?
Well, to some extent, yeah, because when working with the tissue, you know, they go in, you know, you've got different muscle with different shapes, going in different direction, and you know, the way I work is inviting to just go back into this this natural, positive sort of state. You know, usually people come with tension, so everything is kind of, you know, bundled or tight or, you know, restricted. So the idea is to invite some freedom. So the comparison with the work is, you know, the same way I would invite the tissue to release and to expand and do what they need to be doing. You know, the plaiting was also very free in that sense, so that was interesting. But also, what I really liked is that it almost, you know, you shred some paper and usually you don't do much with it, you just discard it. And, you know, we were twisting it, and then, so that was the first phase of a transformation or metamorphose. And then when she created the shape, you know, it became something all of a sudden as a substance, you know, something real, but also something very light, and something which felt that, you know, had an imprint of my being, you know, and my experience as a Black woman, you know, because it's the work carries so much, you know, for us in terms of identity, but you know, so much more things, spirituality, the spirit of community, you know, and I'm quoting, but you know, also this idea that it's there, but it's there, but it's not imposing its presence. Yes, it's very, yet it does have a very strong presence, but it's not forceful. So it's very anti-colonial, as it's been many times emphasized.
Yes.
And yeah, and that really touches me. And you know, as the time goes, I feel that I'm integrating more the experience. And I feel as a Black woman and as a human being, you know, something within is growing. You know, a part of my identity is blossoming. So,
oh, that's lovely. I guess that I love that feeling that the artwork doesn't implant itself in you, it doesn't impose itself on you. Rather, it kind of you move towards it. Almost,
yeah,
and you keep
well,
moving.
Been invited to. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Léa.
you.
Okay, and so our final panelist is Dr. Catherine Souch from the Royal Geographical Society, who's just going to give a point of view from the building's point of view.
Thank you very much, Pat. It's a privilege. It genuinely is a privilege to be here on so many levels, and I want to thank Pat, Sonia, Tia-Monique, and Léa for inviting me to join them this evening. To me, place matters, and that's why it's so important that this project, this installation in the map room, here in the theatre, this discussion in the lecture theatre are taking place here at the Royal Geographical Society in London. The RGS has been in existence for close to 200 years, and for more than 100 years it's been in this building. As an institution, it was founded to advance geographical science, and that remains its purpose today. Exactly how it's done that has, of course, changed through time, but one common thread that's run through the Society's history, that's run through its activities, has been fieldwork and mapping. Individuals and groups have travelled from here to places around the world to observe, to collect, to visualise, to map, and exactly as has already been described, to then return, to interpret, to recount their versions of what they've seen, to present, often on this stage. Throughout its history, the RGS has been a geographical centre, an influential node of knowledge production, a place of power and a place of privilege. And that legacy, as you've heard, as you've seen, some of you will have visited, is embodied in the building. The portraits on the wall that the speakers have been talking about, which you've just seen in the video right now, the names in gold, which you probably can't see around the top of this theatre, the map chests in the map room that organise the world in terms of areas of the world, the archives and the historic collections that are below us, and the more than 1 million maps, often stated to be the largest private map collection in the world. These maps are rich and varied in their purposes, their coverage, their provenance, their modes of production. This project drew on these maps, some of the duplicate and surplus maps in the collections from Europe, from East Asia, and from the Caribbean. And this is important to me in terms of the places these maps represent, but much more so in terms of the context of how these maps were originally created, and how through this project, how through Sonia's creativity, these maps have been reclaimed and reformed through creative practice. After a year in which the building has been empty, literally closed, the shredding and platting of the maps has filled the historic, the imperial, the colonial RGS building with Black women's language, perspective, practices, laughter, and creativity. The sculpture, to me, provided a really vibrant reimagining of what the space can mean, what this space can mean. And so I see this as a huge opportunity for geography as a discipline and for this organisation. It's an important moment, it's an exciting moment, it's one of opportunity and it's one of responsibility. At the Society, we're just beginning a significant project to redesign the historic building, which will, I sincerely hope, more critically project the Society and geography's history and its present. Geography is a core subject in UK schools. Pat's already talked about the educational dimensions to this project. It's studied by all students up to the age of 14, and about half of all those students up to the age of 16 in schools. But geography is a subject in which Black students are significantly underrepresented at all levels, with profound implications for the academy, for professional practice, and for society more generally. This needs to be addressed. Dreading the map is and will catalyse challenging discussions. It will unsettle, but I hope that those will lead to actions, to changes in practices, to new ways of doing things, to new ways of envisaging geography and of this organisation. To discussions, challenging discussions, unsettling discussions about race, racism and geography and the RGS, about inclusions and exclusions in the past, but most importantly, in the present and in the future. So I really want to thank Sonia and Pat for selecting this place, the RGS, for this installation, for this provocation, for opening this conversation, and to helping us to act and to envisage change. So genuinely, thank you.
Okay, so it's always a lovely moment for me in these provocations when I get to look at the people on Zoom and to be able to talk to that audience. They're a very friendly audience for me, a very supportive audience. So I'd like to open the floor to them to ask any questions or make a comment. It doesn't have to be a question. Make a comment or start the discussion. We've got kind of half an hour, so we've got quite a while, so that's good. Over to you.
I'd be happy to say something. Hi, thank you. Thank you, Pat, for inviting us to be here, and thank you, Sonia and the MAP Collective for this beautiful work. I just wanted to comment on, you made me think in so many ways about maps, which often we think of as flat, right? They're on a table. And the way that they've been shredded here, you said it's responding to the weight of history, and it creates this lightness where they've lifted up into the air. And I love the idea of them as a kind of cloud or a drift. And I think it's really funny in the video how they're right in the gaze of those portraits of those white men, this mess of their maps all shredded apart. And I also was thinking of that, so the relation between the ground and the aerial space. You created a kind of aerial geography in the room. You've opened up the space of the room as well as made space for the collective of yourselves shredding the maps. And it made me think also of a sort of time geography as much as a space. So you've opened up the space of the RGS temporally through this practice of braiding, talking together, and a kind of re-memory work that opens up in that space to think differently with the materiality, but also with the temporality of the history of connections between the Caribbean and Africa and the UK. And then finally, that cloud formation that someone described as this kind of rainfall coming down made me think of the verticality of the space as a potomitan, which is that central pillar in a voodoo ceremony. And it's a connection between the sort of, the spirits and the ancestors, between the sky and the ground. And this beautiful kind of material shredded opening of the space I see as also opening up that kind of spiritual connection to those past temporalities of the ancestors. So thank you for sharing this beautiful work.
Thanks so much, Mimi. That was a really interesting set of comments. Is there anything you want to come back on, Sonia? Or we...
No, these are a lot of the things that I was really thinking about. Absolutely, the way that in the map room it loops and returns to itself. It's also taking the whole, because the map is just concerned with surface as flat. So by exploding the map, it becomes just this multi-dimensional thing. And the aerial space is a space that I claimed before. There's a real estate in the ground and in the walls. That this third space is the sky that isn't claimed, and so that's really interesting. I particularly like the idea of the vue d'en, this. So this would be then here, starting to establish that column. Yes, and I do. Yeah, it's definitely something that really is always resonating in the things that I'm thinking about. But perhaps because we're already all together doing these practices, we are going to bring all that with us. Yeah. Yes, just necessarily. Those are some really great reflections. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So two comments, one from Deb and then from Connie.
Hi, sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Sonia, for this really, really, really beautiful project. I love it. It just, hits you, I think, so strongly in this affective way where we're really looking at the past and the present and some kind of vision of a different future all at the same time. And when you were speaking, there were two things that I really loved that you said. One had to do with this practice as in many ways a practice of repair, right? You were talking about mapping as a form of warmongering and braiding as a form of caremongering. And I really liked that distinction. It made me think about the distinction between security, which is about knowing and categorizing and boundaries and barriers and exclusions and surveillance, some of which you also talked about in relation to mapping, and safety, which is about the collective, the conversation, the love being transmitted through the process of doing something together. That also is really about beauty, and I thought that was such a lovely kind of feminist reckoning of that space. And the other thing you just briefly said was that everybody came on the days that you were braiding, and everybody was braiding in their own way, which I also loved because that was an indication of bringing the different perspectives in toward a common project. And in this case, different diasporic perspectives into a common project. And I really loved that. And it made me wonder if you envision this at all as something that might travel, and something that, one might take up in different ways, in different spaces. Would you go someplace else along that geographical trajectory and inaugurate such a project with other Black women toward these same ends? Like, could this sort of build into a really broad transnational diasporic project? Would you have interest in that? Because I think it would have a lot of, it's deep and it's simple and it creates that space of care. And I think it really could have a lot of important resonance in other locations as well.
Just, I seem to, thanks very much, Deb, that's great. I seem to have lost Connie, so I'm hoping that she will
No, I'm here.
No, you're there? Okay, I couldn't see for a second. Oh, that's a relief. I thought, what happened to Connie? Okay.
No, I'm here. I just turned off the camera for a bit, that's all. I'm here.
Okay, please carry on.
To speak. Okay, great. No, I'm very much interested in the fact that it's called dreading. Well done, by the way, Sonia. But I'm very intrigued. You used the word dread. So I'm very now intrigued into the synonyms with Rastafari. And I'm wondering now, if you envisaged bringing in that conversation, especially because you mentioned having young people coming into the space and interacting with this knowledge. Now, a part of that knowledge would, of course, be the fact that Rastafari is a very present state of radicalism and Africanism and, you know, just the position in regards to the map. So I'm very intrigued to see if that concept of Rastafari is being brought into your conversation here with dreading the map, because you use the term dread.
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
Do you want to come back on that? Because that's an interesting question, the idea of dread and the map. Because, you know, like, for example, Kai Miller's work, you know, the cartographer maps his way tries to map his way to Zion. There's that nice kind of interlinkage between Rastafarians and mapping and their own kinds of mapping. Yes. So I wondered whether any of that is in your work.
Well, yes. So dreading the map is a double entendre, so it's a double play on words. So dreading as in fearing, because what the map brought with it, or what these particular maps from here brought with it was there's a dread that comes with that, because once the territory is mapped, it can be divided and ruled. So mapping is, for me, the first start of that. So there's that fear of dreading the map, and what do we do with that fear? And what do we do with the results of all the things that happened after that, which are dreadful? So there's that, and then there's dreading as a practice where it's bringing those strands together in such a way that they cannot meaningfully be separated. So we were braiding, but the braids were then taken and twisted in the work. So the work is dreaded. Well, the first stage is to braid. So, yeah, I mean, the practice of dreading is a particularly, all the hairdressing, they're all particular skills. But, you know, a loctician is someone who really understands dreading. And, yeah, I mean, that's really exciting for me. So it is obviously a nod to the dreadlock, but not so much the whole of the Rastafarian movement, but of course it drags all of that in as well. But more the idea of mashing together, which is what when the dreadlock happens, everything comes together in this inseparable way. I was very interested in that. And in regards to the first point about reiterating the map or collectivizing in different spaces, that is definitely something that would be incredibly exciting. It's a thing. What has happened is it becomes this amazing excuse to just bring very different women together, but also we had men braiding too. It becomes this space. So we start this space and it becomes bigger. I think that it's a very powerful thing that could powerfully travel. And the map lective is expanding already. Some people received map strands through the post and were able to plait and return. So it's powerful to move in that way. And I would be very interested in working with someone who's also actually a loctician and is better at dreading than me. I mean, but this is one of the things that we were worried about, that we're not neat enough platters or not expert platters. But you know, like every plait is good. Yes. So all hair is good, all plaits are good, all dreadlocks are good. So we have to stay in that space of allowing ourselves to be who we are, like warts and all.
Yes. So it's definitely that thing, you know, there's always some kind of residual trauma of black women about being taught to plait and being taught to plait properly and being open to some criticism when the plaits are not right, you know. So there's what I think Tia-Monique mentioned, the words kind of tumultuous element to plaiting as well. It's not just comforting, it's also some kind of disciplining that goes on around plaiting as well.
Yes.
So, Agostina, are you on or off? You seem to...
I am, and I'm going to purposely sidestep this discussion over the dreadlocks for the meantime. I'm very interested in a sense. First off, let me say, I mean, honestly, I was really moved by when I watched this video, and I was really, so in a sense, I mean, I know this sounds like I'm, tripping over myself to say these things, but honestly, thank you for what was really a very rich and very powerful. I mean, I've watched it and I felt very, moved in the images that I was looking at, which in a sense brings me to the question that I'm asking. It's one question in two parts, really. In a sense, really, it reminds me of the Igungun, the idea of in these voodoo ceremonies, the dancing with the, I can still see like some dance programs in, say, Jamaica, where, one of the costume dancers comes out with all of the frills and the hair and the, and doing the twirling and the rest of it. And one of the, I think, in a way, the question that kept worming its way through my mind as I was looking at the performative nature of the presentation, I kept wondering about the, in a sense, Deb related to some of that in terms of a traveling expedition. I was also very interested in knowing, like, the permanence of it, because one of the things is those costumes is that, the tendrils will fall out, and, from time to time, costumes don't have as much hair as they sometimes could in some of the performances. And I was just kind of curious to know about the sort of permanence and whether or not it would be permanently part of the collection of the RGS. And, in a sense, and I guess in a way I'm thinking beyond, say, just the immediate venue of this forum as well as the life of this project. So I wondered perhaps if anybody on the panel could comment on that.
Can I just go straight to Cynthia, and we'll come back to that, just to make sure that I get Cynthia's question. Go on, Cynthia.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, just to echo what everyone I remember very well my first time going to the RGS and feeling like you don't see anything of yourself reflected there. And I think, projects like this, it's really beautiful to think about how many people will go to those places now and see, there's something that I recognize here, or there's something that I have to contribute, and there's space for me here. One thing I was interested in that you mentioned very briefly just now is the learning process. And how something with braiding, that's a very long learning process. It's a difficult learning process. There's no immediate reward, and it's something that happens in it's very community focused. You don't learn from a book. You learn from lots of different people over a long time. And I was wondering how that reflects on those discussions about geography education and how we approach geography education and education around race in geography, and wondering how that needs to be done in a similar way with an acceptance of discomfort and with difficulty and what you were saying, it's not an easy process and
That's a great question, Cynthia. Thank you. I tell you, shall we think about the question of permanence and iteration? I wonder whether Tia-Monique, you might like to think about that question in relation to dialectics and what you were talking about, coming and going. Would that work for you? Was
that Agostino's question?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't hear it that well, but I'll try.
Okay. No, just thinking about that question of permanence and whether how it comes back to us.
Yeah, I think especially I did pick up Agostino, you speaking about John Canoe and this kind of the performance and of this kind of sculpture which occurs in a moment, but leaves these kind of. It's almost like you were talking about the third space, Sonia, as it existing in this space and it making an impact, and it's almost like the the resonance of that is held. And so even as the last questioner was just talking about what is left over in that space and what it does and what it opens out, I think, really has transformed the space, even if it's not physically, but metaphorically, to open up for others to feel that they are a part of this history, because as you said, Sonia, that they are,
I'd really like there to be some kind of permanent memento
of
this, and Catherine and I have talked about this, as well as Joe Smith, the director. I think we will get to something. The thing is thinking about what will be the best kind of memento to have in the building. But also I feel as if this is an iterative process. And so we're already in the second iteration of it. It's here in the Ondaatje Theatre. We're talking to Birmingham Museum to think about another iteration. So for me, the longest permanence would be about having something like this repeatedly again and again. Not necessarily this, other Black artists, other Black performance cultures, but opening up the space to constantly be re-intervened within, rather than it being like one statue that takes up a certain space in the building and the rest of the building carries on, but that for there to be a kind of long-lasting legacy. I want to just abuse the chair a little bit and pick up on Cynthia's question, because Cynthia has picked up on geography education, which is the next stage for CARICUK. So this is our third and final provocation. And in the 3 provocations, we wanted to work with artists to open up and unpack a lot of questions. Because I think artists are really good at that, asking really good questions and opening up a lot of questions. So we're opening up a lot of questions in the provocation stage. The next stage for us is the participation stage, where we're going to put together a learning pack for Key Stage 3 young people in schools, so 11 to 13, and to try to intervene in geography education at that point, so that, as Cynthia says, we can see something of ourselves in the discipline. And we know that the discipline is that GCSE is being taken, GCSE geography is being taken up by more and more diverse groups of young people. So it's become extremely urgent that they need to see something of themselves in the discipline. And so we're starting to think about what that might look like, how we might change the curriculum. So that participation stage is the next stage of CARICUK. Over the next few months, we'll be starting to have those kinds of conversations, leading to a transformation stage where our target will be higher education. And so in the next couple of months, it's really thinking about geography education at the school level before we think about geography education at the higher education level. Okay, Keswa. Your question.
Hi, I don't want to be repetitive, but I do want to say what everybody else has said, which has been that video was incredible, and the talk today also, hearing you all speak about your work has been also incredible. Such interesting questions posed. One of the things that Sonia said that I'm still thinking about was this idea of leaving the southern states of America to head back to London, where there is this sense of colonial ease was the expression. And it was really interesting because I, on the one hand, I understood intuitively what she was talking about. And on the other, I agree that like this, it's so problematic how London's been able to escape its own history in its representation of itself in the present. So the idea of colonial ease, that it's at ease with its colonial past, was really interesting. But I had another question really, that was kind of more of a comment, which was that you had the sculptures are about shredding the maps, and collectively kind of creating these sculptures, these images, which express all sorts of things through them. And I just kind of wondered, is there any hope of redrawing maps? You've talked a lot about how they exclude, how they include, and the way they've done. And I know that as a historian, my geography knowledge is not that great. So I know a little bit about the Peters projection map, which kind of aims to redraw the map as it actually is. And I wondered if, as part of the project, there'll be any idea of rethinking maps, redrawing maps, perhaps also collectively, perhaps with groups of Black women or groups of students, and looking at how the world looks different when you change the map. That was my question.
I mean, that's not a target of CARICUK, because in a sense we're the idea of mapping isn't central to the project. It's more kind of thinking about maps as almost symbolic of the discipline. But there are lots of geographers who are looking at redrawing maps and rethinking maps. And certainly in the first provocation that we had, the idea of lines and redrawing lines was really quite important. I think with this, it's, as Sonia was saying, there's a kind of explosion of the map, and so the line becomes actually, you know, almost irrelevant. There's all about kind of rethinking entirely what a map is. But certainly there is that ongoing work of thinking about who gets to make maps, whose perspective is represented in maps, who draws the lines and what kinds of lines are a kind of ongoing thing. Do you feel like you'll be doing more with maps, Sonia, as time goes on?
So I've created a number of small works which redraw the map. I do see the work in the map room as redrawing the map as being, so taking a map that's flat and making it do this is to think about map is concerned with surface, and it ignores everything that's above, all the air that's above and all the ground that's below. And to make the map do this is to make it acknowledge those spaces and not just stay in this plane. It's also the map is concerned with fixity. This is a new map, it's concerned with flow. I qualified as, in lockdown, I qualified as a permaculture design specialist, and the thing that permaculture maps is everything that flows through the land and not everything that's fixed on the land. So airflow and water flow is particularly important. And this map, which it's a redrawn map, it's a new map, shows flow. And it privileges flow over fixity. It privileges above and below over surface. So it's entirely a redrawing of the map. And it's a map that's been redrawn. I think all maps are drawn collectively, as I was trying to explain with the single colonial man didn't make his map. It was always a collective activity. But this is explicitly collective. And we redrew that, not just one line, but even though there's one line, in each line are many lines from many women, or from many participants, because we weren't all female. So it's definitely drawing, changing all those lines. That's how I understand that is a redrawing of a map. And when you understand this map, then it's a way to map your way out of many of the problems that we're facing regarding climate change. That's how I feel about this work, and this also too, this piece, which is arraigning itself, is an understanding of moving through a landscape, or the idea of the landscape is this, to move to something of flow.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, did you want to? No. So Joe Norcup on YouTube says she just wants to say this is a fantastic, necessary and brilliant project. The film is fabulous, and I hope the sculpture remains permanently in the map room of the RGS as an educative reminder. Unfortunately, it's already been taken down. We won't go into the whole story of how that happened, but we did know it was going to happen. But thank you, Joe, for that comment. So can we have Karen and then Anya, please?
Hi, everyone. It's really, really great to see you all again. Pat, Sonia, this is just an amazing project. And I have to say, I know I'm just repeating what everybody else has already said. But honestly, this afternoon when I watched the film, I was really moved. And it's just a comment, really. I think it was the music that accompanied the film that kind of really got me going. I felt quite welled up when I was watching the film, but the music really struck me, and I just wanted to know whether that music had been commissioned to accompany the film, because it wasn't just just the images. It was how everything worked together and the way it was shot that really struck me. That's just, I guess, what I wanted to say, how amazing that was too.
I don't know, do you know where Gennaro got that music from?
So all we can do is plug our media company, where there's a wonderful videographer who, I explained the project to several videographers, and he was the only person who was prepared to do it on our very meager budget, and understood the project and felt for what was happening here. So that's why there's been a very sensitive documentation, because it was someone who really had a sense of what was happening here and some of the history of that. And so I trusted that, and everything was put together, and all the music, he selected all of that.
Yes, he brought a real artistry to it.
Yes.
And was very kind of, you could see him kind of being drawn in to the project and to what we were saying and to the building. And I was really pleased with the film when I saw it. You could really see that engagement, which was really precious, I think, to me. Thank you. Anya.
Wonderful project. Like Cynthia, I was very struck by that whole question of learning and how learning happens in a very humble and intimate, embodied and very slow way within kind of communities of hair care practice, and how your project helps to juxtapose that against the ways in which knowledge is created and produced through map making. So I thought that was extremely powerful. And also the whole question of the different kinds of connections that might be created by, for example, the looser connections that might be created through a twist, as opposed to the more permanent connections created by a dreadlock, and the ways in which a cane row moves and it's constantly picking up new strands and new connections. And I thought that was all very suggestive. Given your previous work with chairs and the comments that you were making earlier about the objects and some of what Pat was asking about, the way in which the object and the human relate to one another, I was just wondering a little bit about the place of the comb within, because we saw the comb being used in the video, and obviously, I mean, clearly that has centrality within hair practices. But I was just wondering if you had further sort of symbolic reasons or reasons to do with how objects have traveled and moved, as you talked about, for example, how hardwoods have traveled and moved around the Atlantic. If there were also reasons to do with that you wanted to have the comb featuring in that way within the video.
Anything you'd want to say about the comb?
Well, the comb is a tool that we were using for the same reason that we would use it when we're doing our hair, because it was very convenient, it works, and I'm very much a fan of not reinventing the wheel. So we use the comb in community. I mean, these are combs that we had, and so we continue to use those. I think that was why, because it made sense. And also in terms of thinking about connecting back to hair, rather than bringing something new in, why not use what we use in our own communities, in our daily lives? And the whole thing with the trees and the wood, so paper is also trees. So I think there's a connection there. So I'm always thinking about what's traveled and what did we bring with us. And I mean, this is a wonderful book. I think it's 400 Years Without a Comb.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a sense of if you have a comb or you don't have a comb, these are important things.
I think it kind of really. When I saw Sonia using the comb when I came to do the plaiting, and I saw that she had the kind of afro pick there, and I said to her, I've got one of those in my bag if you need another one. And I guess it kind of made me think about just the familiarity of that kind of object, and for some of us where elders or whatever might be in residential institutions or whatever, that kind of sense that it's for the lack of something like that, a kind of familiar object, you don't have home, and there's so kind of familiar little objects like an afro pick seem as if they're nothing when you have them, but when you don't have them, you know, they take with them a sense of home. And it really made me feel, it brought a feeling of being at home in the RGS building, which I've rarely had before, I must say, a feeling of being at home when I saw the Afro pig. It's something that's, you know, it's just emblematic of Black home life. And yeah, it's something that I really treasured, I think, that kind of feeling of the pick with the plaiting. It was, yeah, an important moment for me as a geographer, I think. Okay, I think one last question from Susan, and then we're coming to 8:30, if that's okay. On you go, Susan, then.
Thank you, and thank you very much for just a really wonderful conversation. There's so many things that's come out of it in terms of thinking about creativity, and it made me think that this is such a wonderful example of how creative practices can be centred as a way of decolonising geography. And I wondered, you know, what kinds of other activities, if you have ideas for things that related to this project that can highlight this way in which the past and the present are interwoven, and that, you know, this creativity can also be used to challenge the linearity of chronology and the linearity of spaces. And, you know, is there a way in which we can bring these kinds of activities into things like conferences to make it more welcoming and to embrace different kinds of knowledge in the future? Because I think it's just brought up so many wonderful ideas and opportunities about how we can share knowledge and construct knowledge in new and more inclusive ways as well. Thank you.
I think, you know, Susan was one of the researchers that was with me on my CARICUK network as well, a previous kind of network where we were thinking about creativity in geography and thinking about creativity in relation to insecurity. I think this is a kind of ongoing agenda, really, and a provocation in that sense as well, you know, to geographers and to other academics to think with creativity, to work with creative practice, to challenge ourselves, not just to illustrate what we want to say, but to challenge ourselves to move forward in ways that include other people and don't exclude them in ways that academic work has done. So thank you ever so much. Thank you to my panel, who've been wonderful, as I expected them to be. Thank you to my Zoom audience, who've been provocative and warm and supportive, as you always have been throughout all the provocations. And thank you also to you watching live streaming through YouTube, but also you watching the recording. You're all very welcome. And please do get in touch if you have kind of other observations or other things that you think we should think of. The CARICUK project will carry on until the end of the year. So I'd really like to hear more, and we'll have more events as we get towards the latter half of the year. So thank you very much.